Good morning, good morning, good morning. And to those who are joining me live and to those who are watching on catch up at a later date, that is fine too. Now, I am recording this, so if you want to switch off your video, that is absolutely fine. I think the system blanks out everybody but me, but I always warn people just in case, because you know, you set the system up to do one thing, but it doesn't necessarily always do exactly what you want it to do. So feel free to turn your cameras off. And so welcome to session. Oh, there we go. Somebody, there we go. I think somebody's in twice. I'm not 100% certain. There we go, that's muted now. So welcome to session 2 of Build Your Resilience with Bounce. And to those listening on catch up, I hope you managed to listen to session 1 yesterday. So as always, just the usual disclaimer to take this information in this training and use it on the basis of a common sense approach to your own personal circumstances. And if you have pre-existing medical or psychological conditions that you're under the care of a health practitioner for, then always discuss with them any lifestyle changes that you are going to decide to make. What are we going to cover today? Well, today's session, the way that I always run sessions is always begin every session with a recap on the previous session. This helps to embed that neural pathway and helps build that memory pathway. And that includes a recap of our bounce model of resilience and using the self-coaching checkup from the neck up. So that's what we'll do first thing. Then after that, we will be looking into the U of the bounce model. And that's around who we're choosing to be. We'll also look a little bit at stress and how it changes our behaviours. And then we have a very nice exercise, which will be your homework or after course work. And I will walk you through this tool, which is called self-mapping, and it's a really, really cool way of really helping to overcome those limiting beliefs and really set some really positive, empowering beliefs. We'll then move on to our N of bounce, which is about nurturing, and that is really vital to our resilience. And in particular, we're going to look at self-compassion and emotional intelligence, as well as stress and our stress triggers. Nearly said stress triggers then, and also our energy management, which is really, really important. So let's crack on with our recap. So recapping on yesterday, resilience, as we know, is our capacity to spring back or to recover from difficulties or adversity. The researchers that I in particular like their work around protective factors were Werner and Smith. And with my bounce model of resilience, our B is for belief in our abilities to cope, in particular to cope with change and adversity. So we looked at the power of the subconscious mind and how it goes with our strongest thought and feeling, and how some of our beliefs, which may well have served us when we were younger, actually limit us and hold us in a stuck pattern of repeating behaviour or repeating thoughts and keep us stuck. whereas setting empowering beliefs and believing that things can be done a different way and seen a different way increases our flexibility. And in order to do that, we need to learn to flip things, flip the words that we use, flip the thoughts that we use, and to reframe things. Because the winds of change will blow, and it's up to us to choose how we harness the power of that wind and how we use our sails to do that. And if you didn't get a chance to do the belief exercises yesterday, I would highly recommend that you do spend a little time doing them, because it is important to peel back those layers. You get much more from the course, much more forward momentum. And if you do the exercises and you peel back those layers. Of course, if you want support on doing that, you can always book some coaching in. And optimism, we looked at the chemistry of our thinking, our positive serotonin, and the negative thoughts that cause cortisol. We learned about our reticular activating system and how that's our giant filter that is there to help us and to find the things that we're asking it to. It filters out everything else and goes with our strongest thing that we're thinking about. So if we think we can, we will be able to, we'll find ways to do it. If we think we can't, then that will also keep us stuck. And one great way to help ourselves move forward and to help us keep our drive, attitude, and confidence is to learn to set goals in a way that's empowering and positive. And that's the tool called goal mapping. So the bounce model of resilience is our trampoline bed that, when it's held taut by these 6 springs or principles, that trampoline bed is nice and taut, and it enables us to bounce back very nicely and in a way that empowers us. If, however, one or more of our springs or principles is a little bit weak or neglected or a bit rusty, then our resilience will be low, and we will then need to dig deeper in order to be able to thrive and not just survive. Now, the challenge is always knowing which one of these springs is it that's a little bit loose or a bit weak, and needs oiling, or needs a bit more attention on it. I need to do a little bit more work on myself. I need to get some support in that area. And that's where my checkup from the neck up came, particularly when I'd realized a number of years back that some of the paths that I'd been taking were because my belief was quite low. So the checkup from the neck up is, what are my beliefs about this situation? Are my beliefs limiting me, or are they empowering me? What positive outcome am I looking for? Even when things are really stressy and really, really challenging, there will be a positive outcome there somewhere. And it's just a case of looking for it. And as we're looking for it, part of the thing is, who am I choosing to be? Because if we're choosing to be very passive in the situation, and all control is external, and we're not recognizing what internal control we have, then it's harder to see that positive outcome. Whereas when we are choosing to be a positive, solution focused, aware of the control that we have on our thoughts and our feelings and behaviors, then it's much easier to find that positive outcome. when we're doing that and when we are going through challenge and adversity, it is really important to nurture ourselves. For many people, when adversity hits them, they go for comfort things, which give them an initial fix of feeling better, but inevitably there are more negative effects to that. So thinking about that, in lockdown the first time round, there were some, a lot of people drank more alcohol, and therefore the liver specialists found that in the summer they were having a lot more people with advanced liver disease presenting, because people had drunk their way through the first lockdown, because that was their coping mechanism. But of course it's not a great coping mechanism, and it gets out of control and damages us. So actually, when we're in a challenging situation, that is the time when we really need to think about nurturing ourselves. Who am I connected to that can provide me with the support that I need? That support might be friends and family, or it might be a wider professional support from a counsellor or a coach, or a networking group, or a peer support group. Support comes in many different ways, and that's something that we'll be looking at tomorrow. And then even in the most challenging day, even on the hardest day, there is always a slither of hope. There is always some silver lining there. But remember, if we're not looking for it, if we're not open to it, then we won't spot it. And so by harnessing that reticular activating system and an attitude and a practice of gratitude and looking for the small wins, then we can move ourselves forward. So that's the checkup from the neck up. I recommend printing it off. I have it pinned up myself. I also have little postcards which I use as bookmarks and I give out to people, because it's just nice just to have that reminder. Because even as the creator of this, sometimes just having it written down and in front of you, it just helps you to actually do it and use it. So let's take a look at our third bounce principle. Who are we choosing to be? In any given situation, we have a choice about who we're choosing to be. And how we see ourselves is key to managing our stress and developing our resilience. Remember that Berner and Smith said that if we have a strong internal locus of control, a belief that we do impact on our future, on our destiny, on what happens to us, then we're more likely to be able to be resilient. So when change or challenging situation is thrust upon you, do you see yourself as a victim of circumstance or as a survivor of a challenge? Do you see it as bad luck and bad luck always happens to me? Or do you see it as, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Where's the positive in this situation? If we see ourselves as a passive bystander, then we're giving our power away to others. Whereas if we see ourselves as an active participant in making something positive out of a very challenging and possibly very negative situation, then we change the way we look at it and we change the behaviors and the actions that we take. Now, often people don't ask themselves this question, and you may never have considered it before. Interestingly, I used to have a real victim mentality, and it is, for me, it is a sign that I've got out of balance. If I say something which is more of a victim mentality statement, then I now am alert to that, and I'm able to go, whoa, step back, Helen, take a moment. Really? Are you a victim? Or is there an opportunity here? Yeah. When I was made redundant this summer, my initial reaction was, oh, woe is me. I'm hard done by. It's not fair. Of all the people that made redundant, why did it have to be me? And I'll be honest, I go through that, but I come out the other side. And I allow myself, a few hours, a day or so of woe is Helen. And then I put my big girl pants on. I do my checkup from the neck up, and I get myself back on track. So we all go through hard times, and we all go through upheaval. It's a fact of life. But one of the things that I have realized in the years that I've been doing personal development work, and also working with my own coach, is that the more you know yourself, the better you know yourself when you are on your high self, when you're with your best thoughts, behaviors and actions, and then yourself when you're at your low self, when your thoughts, behaviors and actions disempower you and keep you stuck. The better you know yourself, the easier it is to grow and develop, and also the easier it is to practice self-compassion, which we'll come on to later, and actually be able to move through adversity and change. Now, one of the tools that I was introduced to a number of years ago was disc profiling. The coach that I was working with, it was part of her toolkit, and you always got a disc profile done if you were working with her. And then I went on, was so fascinated by it that I went on and trained to deliver disc profiling myself. And it is really, really fascinating how it gives us insights into our behaviors, how we communicate, and also how other people see us as well. And this is my DISC personality graphs. Okay, so what you'll notice here is they are all kind of a similar shape, but there are subtle differences. So the first graph, this public perception, is the behavior expected of others. So everyone acts according to how they think other people expect them to act. And so this is the sort of your public self, the person that we project to others. Whereas the second graph is our private self, and this is how we respond to pressure. Now, we all have learned responses to pressure, and it's quite interesting. On here with me, the D is for dominance and the I is for inspiration. And interestingly, when I get stressed or put under pressure, I will get more dominant, more assertive, but I'll also get more inspirational. And interestingly as well, I am more likely to step into leadership when I'm under pressure. If there's somebody else that's perfectly capable and competent and that I believe in and trust, I'll let them get on and lead. But if I think that if I'm under stress, then I'm more likely to step up. That is really important to know, because it's also important for people that I work with to know, because if I'm running a team and I start to get more dominant and more assertive, then the question that they can ask themselves is, whoa, why is Helen suddenly behaving like that? If they know that I'm like that and I haven't spotted it in myself, then they can raise that mirror and say, Helen, oh, you know, and actually, if you know and understand how you behave under pressure, it really helps you and your team to be able to work more cohesively together. The third graph on our right hand side, somebody keeps getting unmuted. So the third graph is the perceived self. So it's how you envisage yourself. It's the mental picture that we have of ourselves and our self-image. So that is quite interesting. So that's disc profiling. It's a tool that I use, and I'm just sharing it so that you have an awareness of it. Interestingly, I'm what they call an S and an I, so this is above the line. And interesting, depending, as I've had numbers of these done over the years, I can fluctuate between my I being higher or my S being higher, depending upon whether I'm comfortable in the situation that I'm working in. But the interesting thing for me is to know that, you know, that again, some of my challenges around attention to detail. And so it's important for me to make sure when I'm working that I've got other people who can do some of the attention to detail to help me with that. So a moment for self-reflection and some questions to ask yourself. Learning to tune into ourselves and the language that we use is the first part of raising our awareness of who we are and how we can move into a more resilient mindset. So, for example, if we always blame others for our misfortune, or we blame fate, or it's bad luck, if we see ourselves as passive and powerless, if we think that things are unfair, all of these things are taking our power away from us and our ability to impact positively on our future. Now, the important thing here is to not judge yourself or give yourself a hard time. We are what we are, but we are human beings. We have neuroplasticity, which is the ability to change and develop. And just because we are in a victim mentality does not mean to say we need to stay there. I know that because I've moved out of that myself. I've also helped a lot of clients to move out of that. So these are just questions to ask yourself. And then, as I say, don't judge ourselves. It's about raising awareness and then looking at how we can move forward. Remember, we see the world as we are, and I love this cartoon with his little horn in every single one of his pictures that he painted, because remember, we see the world through the lens of our own experiences, behaviors and beliefs. By widening that lens and that view of what we see, by looking at things from a different angle, so we're not always seeing things solely from our own perspective, and by being willing to go beyond our own experiences, it helps us to be more flexible in our view of the world. And that flexibility in our thinking and our behaviors increases our resilience. Now, one way we can look at that is to call it a paradigm, the paradigm of how we see ourselves. Our opinions, attitudes, and actions and results that we have in life ultimately all spring from this paradigm, this view of how we see ourselves. So this is a useful exercise to do. So what is your current paradigm of yourself? How do you want to be? So if at the moment you're very shy and you want to be a little bit more confident, then we might want to set a goal around increasing confidence or increasing self-belief. If we feel that our life is hard and that everything is an uphill struggle, we might want to change our paradigm to I love my life, and how do we, and then we set goals to move ourselves from where we are to where we want to be. So if our paradigm about our work is that I don't have enough clients as a reflexologist, then I need to change that paradigm to I have a steady flow of clients, and then I need to work on a goal map to make that happen. If my paradigm of my work is that I'm too busy and I don't get any time for myself, then we would need to look at how we change that, so that we change that to having a steadier pace. And that might mean that we need to reduce our hours or change the way that we're working. So this is a very useful exercise to do, and I would recommend that you spend 5-10 minutes after we finish today and just go through that. So if you've got a note paper now, then just write that down. What's my current paradigm of myself, my life, my work, my success and my failures? And then think about the opposite. Obviously you will get the handouts, and you can always do that this evening or later this week if you want to. So a moment to pause and reflect. What does the phrase responsibility mean to you? So just have a little think about it. And again, if you've got a pen and paper, maybe jot it down. If you want to jot it down in the chat box, you are of course more than welcome to. But I know we've got quite a lot of people who have chosen to watch this on catch up because the hours the course is running just didn't quite work for them. The reason I always run my courses during the day is because my broadband in the evening can be a little bit challenging sometimes, whereas during the day it's pretty stable, and I personally prefer not to have that stressor. So that's why all my trainings are always recorded and always run during the daytime, so that that's one less thing that's out of my control, that I can't do anything about. I've done everything I can for my broadband. So responsibility. What does that mean? I certainly remember as a child, the most times that I heard the word responsible was usually my mother shouting, who's responsible for this mess, or who's responsible for whatever. And so in my head, I formed a limiting belief that responsibility was sometimes around being blamed for things which you may or may not have had any part in. And the definition of responsibility is the state or fact of being responsible, answerable, or accountable for something within one's power, control, and management. So when we think about that in the context of resilience, there's a way of changing the way we look at that. And the thing about us human beings is that we can change. We can work on forming new beliefs. We can use techniques to help us manage our thoughts, etc. So we could change responsible to becoming response able. Because if we think about it, everything begins with a thought, and it's our thoughts about the situation that create our feelings. So if it's a thought about something because in the past we've had a bad experience of that, then our thought is going to be negative, our feelings are going to be negative, and then our behaviors and our actions may well also be negative and keep us stuck. And those repeated thoughts, feelings, and actions are what become our habits, and our habits are what shape our lives. And that's why often we go round and around in ever decreasing circles. So if we were to track back and change the way we think about something and think, okay, well, I don't want to be like that anymore. I don't want to be a victim of circumstance. I don't want to be the person who it always seems has got bad luck. I want to be somebody who makes an impact on their future, who makes changes. And yes, those changes might be very, very challenging, and they might be disrupting, and they might be painful. But if that moves me from where I am to where I want to be, then that can only be a good thing. And as with everything with us human beings, it all starts with our thoughts. And remember, when we think positive thought, we get serotonin, and then that helps our brain to open itself up to more creativity and more thinking. So by raising our awareness and aspiring to be a better version of ourselves tomorrow than we were yesterday, we open ourselves up to growth and development, and that opens us up to change and to developing these new neural pathways that empower us. And we do need to practice it. It is repetition, repetition, repetition. A lot of our limiting beliefs and our habits we've been practicing for years and years. And so just going, oh, Helen, I'm going to be a more positive thinker now, is not just going to make it happen. I have to set the intention. Helen, you're going to be more positive in your outlook. Then I have to set goals around that. I have to create steps. I have to practice. I have to raise my awareness so that when I'm slipping backwards, I can catch myself and move myself forward again. And so this response able is our ability to respond and to choose our responses. So we choose our response, which is a motivating and more positive and moves us from where we are to where we want to be. When that is aligned with purpose and direction and the positivity of actually I really do want to make a difference to my own life, and that enables me to make a difference to other people's lives. When all those are aligned and we work towards the goals that we want, it helps us be more proactive in moving towards that resilient mindset. And even in this current lockdown situation that we are in, we can sit and be static for those of us whose work has stopped and we're not able to work at the moment. Or we can choose to either take the time to nurture and recover and to take some time for ourselves and to work on our health and our well-being, or we can choose to work on our business and our website or personal growth and development. If we're working in a sector that has not been shut down, but actually we're getting busier and busier and busier, then we can again think about how we're thinking and choosing and feeling to be in that situation, and what we can do on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis to help ourselves and maintain balance for ourselves. Interestingly, for us human beings, we are all so interconnected. As a therapist, I see that so often in my clients. You can feel the tension in people's feet. You can see the tension in people's feet. And actually the mind and the body are so interconnected. And interestingly, I was talking to somebody the other day and they said, oh, why do you think, and I know that they are super, super busy at work, and they shared that they, you know, occasionally get these tightness in their chest, and we then started to talk about, it's not chest pain, it's just a tightness, it's like contracted breathing, where they're just very, very tense. And because I know this person, I was able to say, well, that sounds like when you get quite stressed. And I know that in the past that they have had challenges with very, very tight shoulders, and they've had challenging with very short, shallow breaths when they get very stressed. So again, just we had a conversation. Their perception was they were not stressed, they were just busy. But then when we talked through, well, what does busy mean and what does busy look like, and where's your self-care in this, and when did you last go to the chiropractor, because you know that your shoulders get quite tight, and then that leads to tightness in your chest, and and so you can see where I'm going with this. But sometimes we're so stuck in our own heads, we don't see it for ourselves. And this is where having support mechanisms in place and actually pausing on a regular basis to check in with ourselves and check in, where's the tension in my body? Where's the discomfort in my body? And how does that relate to what I've been thinking and what I've been doing? And if you can build that into your daily practice of looking after yourself, and even if you can't do it daily, if you can do it once a week or once a month, just check in and reflect on how you've been, slowly but surely you will build better balance into your life, and better balance builds better resilience. Now, we all have a little bit of a thinking, feeling preference on how we like to make decisions and how we evaluate situations. Some people are very objective and logic based, and some people are right up the other end, and it's all about feelings and emotions. So again, this thinking, feeling preference is important to have an awareness of as to where you are naturally on this scale. So someone on the thinking, as I've said, someone on the thinking end of the scale is going to use logic and rational criteria to make a decision. Somebody that's on the feeling end will use personal values and considerations. And it's the being on the extreme ends that tend to lead to challenging. Often most of us can zip along here a little bit, or we'll have a little bit of a thought as to where we are. But this is really not an either or category, because actually we all use a mix of logic and emotion to make decisions. And often as human beings, we'll think that we're really very, very rational creatures, and that we're not emotional. But it's very rare that choices are one or the other. The interesting thing is that when you are very stressed, stress can really disrupt this thinking, feeling scale, because when your amygdala has fired off your stress response and your cortisol that's surging through your body actually shuts off access to the front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the very rational part of your brain. And I worked a number of years ago with a really lovely psychologist from Southampton University, and John Perry, and he said to me, Helen, the most important thing when somebody is really stressed is that you actually need to lend them your brain, because when they're really, really stressed, they can't access their whole brain themselves, because they're so flooded with stress hormones that this rational part of their brain is just not accessible to them. So by lending them yours and by supporting and helping them, you can help them move out of that. Because when we're under stress, it is much harder to think rationally. It's much harder to have control of our thoughts and feelings and actions. And that's why sometimes when we're stressed, we make really poor decisions. For example, a normally mild-mannered, calm individual may, after a period of sustained stress at work or home or frustration, may find themselves in a traffic jam at a time when they are really busy or they've really got to get somewhere. And they go from being a really mild-mannered person to lashing out verbally or maybe even physically to somebody else, because they're no longer in control of that rational part of the brain. So normally an alert person's brain has moderate amounts of chemical messengers that lead the prefrontal cortex to take charge and perform high-level thinking. That's the left brain on this picture. But with stress, those chemical signals flood the brain, activating the amygdala, and that means we become more heightened to awareness of external threats. Yeah. So that's why when we're under stress and life has thrown us a huge curveball like a global recession and pandemic, we need to make sure we've got lots of tools in our toolkit to help us be able to stay balanced and to get out of stress response and into a more balanced place. So, and some of the tools that I use, I'm not quite sure why that keeps happening. Some of the tools that I use are tapping, which is a big tool of mine, which I did share yesterday when I sent handouts. I sent you my tips and tricks for managing anxiety and overwhelm, and that tapping routine that's in there is a big one that I use to take me from being up here, maybe on an 8 or a 9, to bring myself down to a 2 or a 3 or a 1, to undo that prefrontal cortex, to take myself from very stressed to not stressed. I also use a lot of visualization. So if I'm in a situation where, so say for example, I'm dealing with somebody who is emotionally more draining for me, then I will do a positive visualization before I am with them, to make sure that I protect myself from any negative jibes or words which they are not aware that they are using. They're not aware of how that takes me out at the knees, and it's not their responsibility to change that. It's my responsibility to have tools in my toolkit so I know how to deal with that person in a way that empowers me. And for me, thinking about that particular situation is I have a positive visualization where I bring up a lovely iridescent bubble that goes around me, and I can hear, I'm in my bubble and I can hear everything, but there any negative words that they are using at me, they bounce off the surface of my iridescent bubble, so they don't take me out at the knees emotionally, and they don't put me back into a victim mode. So this is something where when we have this raised level of awareness of who we're choosing to be, and we've got tools in our toolkit, then we can start moving ourselves into a place that's more resilient. You see, we all have a low self and a high self. Our high self is very much about our more soulful self, our more inner wisdomed self. It's more about the greater good and being on purpose and doing things for the wider humanity, whereas our lower self is more ego-based, more fear-based, more survival instinct-based. It's really lovely exercise to do, to look at how we are when we're in our low self, and then think about how we are when we're in our high self, and maybe choosing to set some aspirations as to how we want to be when we're in our high self. And when we do that, and then we have what we call our high self map, which I'm just going to show you in a moment, we can use that then is one of our tools in our toolkit. So when we are feeling down and not having a great day, we can look at our high self map, we can use it as positive affirmations, and it shifts us, it shifts our thinking, and that shifts our feeling, and that moves us forward. So the high self, low self is again a tool, one of my tools in my toolkit from Brian Main, and it is a really, really powerful tool. And I'm just going to walk you through how we do that. And in the handouts, when I send them out to you this afternoon, there will be a paper copy of how, and I recommend printing it off and then sitting down and spending some time doing the low self, and then we do the high self after. So with the self-mapping, what we do is we start with these the greens here. Where's my little cursor gone? Over. Okay, there we go. So we start with what's our mental attitude when we're not being who we want to be. Emotionally, how do we behave when we're at our low? And then physically, what do we do to ourselves physically? What's our attitude to our body when we're at our low self? And we go around and we do attitude, we do habit, and we do outlook. Now, you can start wherever you want. For a lot of people, actually starting with the habits, what habits do I display? So when I'm at my low self physically and I'm not taking care of myself, what habits do I display? When I'm at my low self mentally, what habits do I display? Negative thinking. Okay. And I'm in a victim mentality, and my outlook is that the world is a gloomy place that is just, and it's a bit Eeyore, a bit woe is me, my life is shit, excuse the language, kind of thing. And again, emotionally, my emotional might be when I'm at my low self, that I'm quite hard on myself. So we ask ourselves these questions and we start to build a picture up of our low self. So this is my low self. It's out there, warts and all, that when I am at my low self, my thoughts are very, very negative. My attitude is very neglectful to myself. And my outlook is that I really, don't give a damn. If I were looking at myself physically, I get very unmotivated, but I have a lot of high expectations of my body that it can just cope with all the rubbish that I'm feeding it and the exercise that I'm not giving it. And I'm not tuned into my body when I'm in my low self. Materially, so money-wise, spending gets worse when I'm at my low self, and a bit presumptuous and a bit improvident in the way that I think about money. So when we know how we are with our low self, and on the paper ones, what we recommend you doing is you write it down in pencil, and then we start to think about who we want to be for our high self. And we take a deep breath and we start to think about our high self. And we think, okay, so if I'm a negative thinker when I'm at my low self, how do I want to be when I'm at my high self? I am optimistic. I'm attentive to my thoughts. I have that raised level of self-awareness so I can catch myself, and then I'm kind and compassionate to myself. I don't give myself a hard time. I treat myself kindly. I bring myself back. I flip my thinking. I reframe it, and I move into a better place mentally. Emotionally, I am responsible. I know I can choose my thoughts and my feelings. I need to pause and slow down in order to do that, but I can do it. And my outlook, that is, I am worthy of being able to do that. I am worth me looking after myself. And so you move around, and we always set these in a positive present tense as if we already have it. The negative low self, you can just write down single words. Obviously, we do not want the low self to be positive present tense because we don't want to spend any more time in our low self, okay? But in our high self, we want those positive present tense, because if we then use them as affirmations, it helps move us forward, and it helps build that neural pathway, and it helps take us to where we want to be. So this is a super, super powerful tool for helping us move into choosing to be our higher self more of the time. And then we can get really lovely, and we can put pictures on them and things. Now, I've done this in PowerPoint, and if you are a PowerPoint whiz, I'm happy to send you the PowerPoint template. But for most people, it's actually best to do it on paper to start with. And also it is a bit of a challenge to redo these little pictures so that they're all like tiny on this little PowerPoint thing. So we generally say with the self map, do it on paper first. And with the low self, write it in pencil, and then you rub it out as you form your high self. It's a really, really powerful exercise to do. It does need some time for you to do it. Don't rush it. After doing your low self, you may need to physically get up, move, shake it off, give yourself a shimmy and a shake, and then go, right, big girl knickers on. Now I'm going to work on my high self, because I deserve to be in my high self more of the time than I'm in my low self. And it's a really powerful thing to do. This is how it might look if you were doing it on paper. With some nice pictures and some colour. And actually, in the group that I've recently been working with the Resilient Reflexologist program, we had some amazing high self maps that were beautifully hand drawn, and then we had some that were just like lots of color and lots of stick people, and then we had some that were created in PowerPoint. But this is the exercise that will help you be able to choose who you're choosing to be in a more positive way, and that will make you more resilient. So that's the end of our first part. I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll start part 2 in about 3 minutes time. Okay, so I'll put part 2's slide on, and we will kick off dead on 12 o'clock, and that just allows everybody time to have a little bit of a stretch, go for a wee, etc., because 2 hours in front of Zoom without moving is a lot of sitting. So back with you dead on 12 o'clock. There we go. Right. So now let us look at the fourth bounce principle, which is N, nurturing our mind, body and spirit. So Ferner and Smith said that a resilient person loves well by having caring relationships in their lives, works well by being successful in their job, plays well and enjoys leisure time, and expects a positive future for themselves. Now, those caring relationships includes a caring relationship with ourself. Nurturing ourself is an important part of our resilience. Many people lead very, very busy lives with a lot of demands upon them. A lot of pressure that is constant and juggling and multitasking and wearing different hats for the different roles that we have in life is a little bit of an art form. And even when our role is to nurture other people, often those who nurture others are actually not very good at nurturing themselves and may well neglect to nourish, recharge and nurture ourselves. And this is a problem. When you are the linchpin in people's world, particularly, and I find this particularly with my female busy clients, that often they're the central linchpin in their world with their people that they're looking after at work, their family, their own children, their brothers, sisters, friends, and they take a lot of care of them, but they neglect to look after themselves. And so for those people, more than anybody else, reframing and rechanging how we look at the importance of nurturing is really, really important, because we do need to look after ourselves. And many people are very, very hard on themselves and expect a lot more from themselves than they do from other people. Now, there can be a lot of reasons why people are quite hard and harsh on themselves. There can be a lot of reasons why we have a lot of negative head chatter. Maybe when we were children, we got a lot of negative feedback, or we had relationships with people where our needs were overlooked or denied. There is no denying that human beings are very, very complex things. And certainly when dealing with people who are in caring professions and nurturing professions, and obviously I've done quite a lot of work recently with a lot of therapists, it's quite interesting that actually within that there are a percentage of people who are what we call highly sensitive people. Now, about 20% of the population are highly sensitive people. And these people process things much, much more deeply than others. And the research looking into it thinks that it stems from a difference in the way that their brains and their nervous systems respond. They seem to be wired to notice and interpret other people's feelings and emotions. It's like they're more finely tuned to pick up on even subtle emotional cues and to react to them. And highly sensitive people do feel things very, very deeply. They're more likely to cry very easily, to prefer time alone to recharge, and they often can display a huge amount of empathy. And if you want to know more about highly sensitive people, I raise this here just because I've noticed that there is quite a lot of the people that I've worked with recently would be described as highly sensitive people. And the researcher that identified this as a personality trait is a lady called Dr. Elaine Aron in 1991, and she wrote a book called The Highly Sensitive Person. But whether we are a highly sensitive person or just the 80% that's normally that is a normally wired sensitive person, the important thing for us and our resilience is the fact that as human beings, we need to actively practice some self-compassion. And self-compassion is this innate awareness of the suffering by oneself or others. Well, compassion is the innate awareness of suffering and a wish to alleviate it. So obviously, if you think about the highly sensitive people, then they're generally very compassionate people as well. And if they're doing a lot of caring, we can get really out of balance. And if our roles are that we do a lot of caring of other people, again, often we push that self-compassion to one side because we're so busy caring for others. But self-compassion is really, really important in helping us to be resilient. And the researcher who is well worth looking into is a lady called Kristin Neff. And she's the associate professor at the University of Texas in their educational psychology department, and her research created these self-compassion scales, and you can actually go and measure your levels of self-compassion, and it's quite insightful. If you think about our last bit of bounce as who we're choosing to be, if part of who we're choosing to be is actually really harsh and really hard on ourselves, then we're going to get more burnt out. So we need to know where we sit on that self-compassion scale, and then think about how we move ourselves from not being very self-compassionate into a place where we are more self-compassionate. Now, we're all works in progress and nothing happens overnight. But if we make a commitment and we get support, or we're very focused on supporting ourselves, we can move forward. Self-kindness entails being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, when we fail, or when we feel inadequate. It is not about flagellating ourselves with self-criticism. Many people do use harsh language with themselves. I know I used to. Oh, for goodness sake, Helen, you're so stupid. You're so clumsy. What were you thinking of? I'm ashamed of you. You know, the negative head chatter when I wasn't compassionate to myself was not a pretty place to be. I certainly would never, ever have said any of that rubbish that I said about myself. I would have never said it out loud to anybody else or about anybody else. research actually shows that when you work on your self-compassion, it helps you to recover more quickly from traumatic situations. It helps us to recover more quickly from failure or from embarrassment. So self-compassion is something to really take a moment and look into. Now, Kristin Neff took the self-compassion scales, and this is some of the detail that is within that. Okay, so self-kindness versus self-judgment. So self-kindness, i.e. treating oneself with understanding and forgiveness. Then the common humanity versus isolation is the recognition of one's place in shared humanity. In other words, acknowledgement that people are not perfect and that personal experience is part of the larger human experience. And then her mindfulness is emotional equanimity versus over identification. So how does that work in practice? So the common humanity. So common humanity involves recognizing that part of being human is that actually we're all imperfect, and that actually I'm not the only person who's having a hard time, that actually there are other people out there also having a hard time. When people are out of balance and their resilience is low, there is the challenge of slipping into the mentality of I'm the only person going through that, and isolating ourselves from others. As human beings, we don't always get what we want, and part of the human experience, according to Kristin Neff, is the fact that we're all imperfect, but our imperfections are what make us human. And rather than beating ourselves up and giving ourselves a hard time, accepting and being gentle on ourselves, particularly when faced with painful experiences, is part of practicing self-compassion. Self-compassion requires us to take a more balanced approach to our negative emotions and to not suppress those feelings, but also not to over exaggerate those feelings. And that is important in the way that we think about ourselves. With mindfulness, it's about being aware, being present, being non-judgmental of ourselves, and just being with that emotion, that feeling, and being in a receptive state of mind where we observe the thought, we observe the feeling, we don't deny it, and we don't suppress it. But then we maybe think about how we would prefer to be, and then working out how we move from where we are to where we want to be in a way that is kind and compassionate to ourselves. So, what is self-compassion not? Well, sometimes some of the problems that people have when they think about being self-compassionate is they confuse it with self-pity. But self-pity is very different from self-compassion. When individuals feel self-pity, they become immersed in their own problems and forget that other people have similar problems. They ignore the interconnectedness that we have and that we are all part of human beings and that we all suffer. And with self-pity, they think they are the only person in the world who is suffering. And self-pity tends to emphasize sort of quite a lot of egocentric feelings and feelings of separation from others, whereas self-compassion is about recognizing that we are all part of humanity. We all have tough times. We all feel tough emotions, and we're not alone. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence. Many people are reluctant to look at self-compassion because they are worried that they would let themselves get away with anything. Oh, if I'm really nice to myself, well, goodness gracious me, it'll be the end of the world. Because actually, I've always, been really quite hard on myself, and that's the way that I am. Well, no, it's not self-indulgence to be kind. We wouldn't say it was self-indulgence if we were using it, if we were being kind and compassionate to our friend. And although self-compassion may seem similar to self-esteem, they're actually very different in many ways. Self-esteem is what refers to our sense of self-worth, our sense of perceived value, and how much we like ourselves. Whereas in contrast to self-esteem, self-compassion is not based on self-evaluations. People can feel compassionate for themselves because all human beings, and this is the key, all human beings deserve compassion. They deserve understanding, and that's not because they possess a particular set of traits, that they're pretty or talented or whatever. It's because we're human beings, and all human beings deserve compassion, love, and understanding. So this means that with self-compassion, you don't have to feel that you're better than others or not as good as others. Self-compassion's about allowing for greater self-clarity, recognizing our failings, but not giving ourselves a hard time about them, but thinking about with kindness and love and positive intention, how do we move ourselves from where we are to where we want to be? And as I say, it is a part of emotional resilience. The more compassion, self-compassion we practice with ourselves, as well as towards others, then the more likely we are to develop more caring, nurturing relationships. And that can only be a positive thing. So some tips on being self-compassionate towards yourself. The first one goes back to something we've said quite a few times on this course, you probably realise, which is the thoughts that we have, and to talk to ourselves as if we were our own best friend. And whilst many people have a very critical, self-critical voice in their head, a way that we can get around that is by reframing its observations so that they're in a more friendly way. And then that helps us to change the way we talk to ourselves. So initially, if you've always been quite self-critical, the first action is awareness, then the belief that you can change that, and then the practice of when you catch yourself, reframe it, flip it, change it to words that you would use if you were talking to your best friend. And slowly but surely you will build a neural pathway that is more kind, and that negative thinking habit will be dialed down and a positive, empowering habit will come up. Another way for some people is to get it off their chest and to write it down. And keeping a daily journal where you process the difficult events of your day through the lens of self-compassion can really help move you forward into making self-kindness and understanding that we're part of, we're human beings, and that common humanity, it can help you move forward. And yeah, practicing that really can help move us into behaviors that empower us in a way that's more positive. Emotions are difficult things, and a lot of us have not really ever been taught or understand how to feel emotions, and often that's where that self-critical and squashing down things and feelings can come from. But feeling our emotions and recognizing when they are negative and when they're positive, when they are pleasant or when they are unpleasant, and knowing how to, having tools in our toolkit so that if something's happened and we're feeling, or we've just got out of bed that day and we're feeling low and blue and lethargic, how do we move ourselves from that feeling to feeling better? Maybe not feeling super excited and firing on all cylinders, but maybe just moving ourselves to a more neutral place that is better for us. And the best work that I have come across around understanding emotions is the work by Marc Brackett. And he is the founder and director of Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And he has the most amazing program that he runs in schools, which is very evidence-based, and it's about social emotional learning. And he has had these 25 years of experience of working with emotions and helping improve the lives of children and adults. And he's created this blueprint for understanding our emotions and then how to use them in a way that helps us, allows us to feel. Because as a reflexologist, I can tell you that if you suppress emotion and you push it down and you don't recognize it, it will inevitably pop up somewhere in your body, usually when you least expect it. So what Marc says is that emotions matter, and that actually emotions can help us with our attention, with our memory, with learning. We make better decisions when we are aware of our emotions. We're more creative, we have better relationships, and our health and well-being is better when we are able to identify our emotions and then also be able to regulate our emotions. And that regulating emotions doesn't mean denying them. So if we're very angry about something, squishing it down and going, I'm not really angry, just puts tension elsewhere in our body. But if we have strategies, how do I move myself from really angry to a calmer, more positive place, can be a really powerful tool in your toolkit. If we were to think about that in terms of anxiety, a lot of people are feeling quite anxious at the moment. And if you think about anxiety and how it presents itself and how it acts in our brain, it's a little bit like our brain's warning system, that it's trying to protect us. And yet, what's it trying to protect us from? And when we're stuck in a stress response, when we're stuck in a negative thinking pattern, it's really hard to move ourselves from that state of anxiety into a state that is more pleasant. And this is where learning about self-regulating and having tools in your toolkit can really help. So how are you feeling today? If you were to write down how you were feeling, what word would you write down? And then think about where you're feeling it. Where do you feel it in your body? If you're feeling tense, where's that tension sitting in your body? Is it sitting in your shoulders? Is it sitting in your jaw? If you're feeling anxious, is that anxiety in your chest or your throat? Or is it in your belly and your tummy? And how do we move from anxiety and tension to relaxation and to feeling more balanced? As I say, I use a lot of tapping. Tapping is one of my go-to tools, and visualization, and also something called reflective repatterning, which is around about sort of neutrality of, well, actually, I don't want to be angry and I don't want to be, like bursting out of my skin, but I just kind of want to be somewhere in the middle, and very powerful tools. When Marc is working with children, and actually I think the children's work is really quite interesting. He works with colour as well, because actually saying, I feel kind of okay, when you ask people how they feel, they often go, oh yeah, I'm okay. Well, tell me a bit more about that. What's okay feel like? Okay, it's kind of neutral. It's not like high energy. Okay, it's kind of like, yeah, kind of sit in the middle somewhere. Okay, well, how do you want to be today? So with the children, they have this square. So you have the level of energiness, they call them mood meters, and then the level of pleasantness. Yeah. So, and they color code them. Yeah. So then if we look at this, so with children, they might not know the words that are associated with the emotion. And even as adults, it's pretty hard sometimes to think, oh, I feel okay. Okay, so tell me a bit more about okay. You know, we don't have the words for it because we didn't grow up that way. We weren't really taught. A lot of what we were taught about emotion was suppression, suppression, suppression. So the work that Marc's doing is to, first of all, to colour the children. So how do you feel? Oh, I'm feeling a bit down. Okay, down is a blue colour. So then these are some of the words that might be associated with a blue colour. Yeah. Or if so anxious is a high energy, high unpleasantness. Yeah. And cheerful is high energy, high pleasantness. And calm is low energy, high pleasantness. And so with the work in schools, what they do is they start with the colours. Oh, I'm feeling quite red today. And then they help the children attach words to them. And then they start to help them put strategies in place. And what I particularly like about the way that this work is being done is actually they start from a top-down approach. So they actually start with the senior management team and the head teacher. And only when they've nailed that and they're all able to express their emotions and have strategies to move themselves from high energy unpleasant to high energy pleasant, do they then start to bring it down to the other teachers and then to the pupils. So this is not a quick fix thing. And the book that was on the other slide, Permission to Feel, is the sort of the way that he's bringing this to like the wider mainstream audience. And then they talk about taking a meta moment. And obviously each day, we all feel many emotions. You know, we could have like thousands of emotions every day. And in fact, you know, we might even have 3 to 5 emotions every minute. But it's also interesting to think about how much time do we spend in each one of these quadrants? Are we more likely to spend a lot of time, you know, in the blue quadrant, or are we more likely to spend quite a lot of time in the red quadrant? And if we are faced with adversity and a challenging situation, does that move us out of the green zone into the red zone? And then how do I get myself back into the green zone? So with the children, they talk about having a meta moment. So when they feel the emotion, they stop, they think about it, recognize which of these colors it is, give it a word if they have got a word for it. They then think about how they want to be. So that works in quite nicely with our low self, high self. So this would be your low self and this would be the high self. And then what strategies have I got to move myself to a better place? And this is some of the strategies that we might use. So we might, you know, if we were up here in the red zone and we were feeling quite, we might want to take a walk or do a breathing exercise or a tapping exercise or a bit of meditation to move us down here into the green. If we were feeling very blue and down, what do I need to do to get myself to feeling happier? Do I need to listen to some music, get some dancing on in the kitchen? Do I need to have a chat with somebody who lifts me up? And all of this, knowing how we are emotionally and how we move ourselves from one zone to the next, is a skill that I very firmly believe that I never learnt. I certainly didn't know that when I was a young person. And actually, now that I know about it, I'm finding it much easier to get myself more energized if I'm feeling a bit flat, and know what I need to do to, and for me, if I'm feeling quite flat, I've got to get moving. I've got to, you know, get physical, and otherwise I'll just stay static and slow, etc. So for me, it's put some loud music on, get dancing in the kitchen, maybe go for a run, you know, anything that's more high energy. Same as if I am anxious, then it's about negative head chatter and worries. So it's about using my tapping, reframing, rethinking, getting my high self map out, which there you go, you see, have it handy, always have it around, and then using these on my high self. I will use them as positive affirmations, and I will make myself say them. I am attentive, I am optimistic, I am compassionate. And if I sense and hear when I'm saying them that I've got low energy, it's like, there's an awareness, right? You're not feeling very worthy of yourself today, Helen. Right, now let's look at what you have done. And then again, dip into that toolkit, pull out a few things to get myself back on track. Now, if you want to know more about Marc's work, I would highly recommend listening to Brené Brown's Unlocking Us podcast, which are on all of the podcast platforms. She really went to town. She was just about to launch her podcasts in the spring, and then obviously COVID-19 hit, so she cranked it up a whole nother level, and using Zoom she got on loads of amazing people to do podcasts with her. And Brené's podcasts, listening to them, they're usually between half an hour to 40 minutes on my phone as I walk in the mornings. So sets me up for the day. And she has introduced me to so many more people that I just wasn't aware of their work. So this is my go-to person. It's one of my strategies to move me from a blue to a yellow square, is to get a bit of Brené on, because her perspective on life is just absolutely amazing. And if you've never heard of Brené Brown, then check out her website, and also check out the TED talk that she did on vulnerability. She's a researcher, and most of her research has been around shame and vulnerability, and how important feeling vulnerable is to us and makes us human. And she's also wrote a cracking book last year called Dare to Lead, which is around leaderships and the importance of leaders being vulnerable and you know, not suppressing their humanity. So yeah, she's like my go-to person. I'm a big Brené fan. So let's have a look at stress, because actually if we think about our emotions and we're thinking about, oh, actually I'm quite stressed and I'm quite angry at the moment, or I'm quite anxious at the moment, how do we, if we recognize where our stress triggers are, then we can move ourselves more effectively around those colored squares. Now, stress triggers or stressors come in two forms. There are external stressors, which are events and situations that happen to us. I would say a global pandemic is definitely an external stressor, okay? These are things that happen that are a source of stress, yeah? But you can, so that's a big one. We all know that, but let's think about some of the smaller ones. We also know that like major life changes like death, divorce, house moving, etc., are all going to be big stressors. But then there's also the little stressors in our environment. So that might be things like noise or light, etc. So if you are somebody who is very sensitive to noise and to light, then being in an environment that's very bright, that's very loud, or got a lot of repetitive noises on, it's going to cause you more stress. Yeah. Other external stresses are some of the things in our workplace, like an impossible workload, endless emails, the urgent demands where somebody perceives that this has got to be done like yesterday, and being able to reframe those and understanding that because it's urgent to them, is it urgent to me, and what level of urgentness. And then our internal stressors come from our responses and are self-induced, for want of a better description. This is where our negative head chatter and our fears and our fear of failure and our fear of public speaking, or our fear of flying, or our fear of putting our heads above the parapet. So anytime that I'm about to put up on Facebook, I'm doing some training, I always have this fear of putting my head above the parapet and being judged. So I actually have to sit and do some work on myself and some visualizations so that I actually do it. Otherwise, I just stay quiet and stay stuck. Another internal stressor is when we feel like we haven't got any control. But if we reflect back on some of the things that we've learned, we can control our thinking. And if we can use some of the tools in the toolkit to get ourselves from a negative thought to a positive one, then we can move ourselves forward. And also the important other thing, which I, particularly when I'm working with my reflexology clients, is raising our awareness of how stress affects our health and well-being. Because when we're under prolonged stress, because we're going through change and a challenge, that cortisol that's surging through our body will increase our levels of inflammation, and that will cause us to become unwell. And each of us have different ways that that presents in their body. If I were to use myself as an example, I would say that for me, I know when I have been stressed for a period of time, and I may think I'm dealing with it, but I'm clearly not dealing with it, because I get very, I'm histamine intolerant. So what happens is I get really itchy. So, and I also start to react to foods and to other substances. So I am allergic to quite a lot of antibiotics. And I'm also very sensitive to a lot of chemicals. You'll never find a plug-in air freshener in my house because they give me migraines. The chemicals in them cause me to have migraines. Cleaning products, and again, cause me to sneeze uncontrollably. My body, I'm sensitive to sulfites in foods, so preservatives in foods. And again, if I'm very balanced and very well, I can deal with these things and I might just sneeze for a little bit. If I'm very stressed and I have got lots of cortisol, then my body's histamine response changes, and I react to just shy of everything. In particular for me, an early trigger is that I'll start to really get really itchy, and particularly again in the evenings. So learning about how your body responds to stress is really important. For some people, when they get very stressed, it goes straight to their gut, and they might get more irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. They might have looser bowels, or they might have more premenstrual tension, and they may find that their moods become more irritable. So tuning in to how your body perceives stress and then how it exhibits it is a really important part of nurturing yourself and understanding yourself. And when I work with my reflexology clients, one of the things that I like to do with them is to help them learn to tune in more to their body, because I think the better we know ourselves mentally and physically, then the easier it is to be able to manage our stress and have balance in life. So my little ABC approach to stress is very simple. First of all, awareness. Where are my stress triggers? Where do they hide? Where do they occur? And how do I recognize them? Then the belief is around that I can change these things. I can change how I think about them. How do I move myself from negative emotion to a positive emotion? And then my commitment to actually doing that. So changing my thoughts, changing my feelings, changing my actions, breathing through it, using my tapping, using visualizations, actually using those, because there is no point in having a toolkit full of tools if we don't use them, and then another interesting thing is about recognizing that when we are stressed, we have to complete the stress cycle. That means we have to go through the stress tunnel and come out the other side. And that requires us to do two things. One is to burn off the excess stress hormones, because if you think about it, if you go back to the original fight or flight, when your fight or flight is set off, your body's primed for action. It's primed to either fight or to run like the clappers, or to freeze. And when it freezes, because that is sometimes the most protective thing that it needs to do, it still has to get rid of the excess stress chemicals. And that's usually within the body, that then has to get rid of physically. So moving through the stress cycle is about physically burning off excess stress hormones through walking, running, singing, and activity. And then the other key part of completing the stress cycle is helping our brain recognize that it is safe and that the stress response is switched off. And these are two parts that a lot of people don't recognize. And feeling safe is about doing something that being with people that make you feel safe, or doing something that makes you feel safe, and getting your oxytocin levels back up. And a technique I use is something called havening, which is this stroking down the arms like this, and it's very powerful to help you complete the stress cycle. And I'd not heard about, for me, this was like the missing link about stress that I wasn't aware of. And again, this is another of Brené's podcasts with these two, Emily and Amelia. And the reason the duck's there is because the duck is my visual reminder. Because actually, when you look at animals, they're very good at burning off the stress response. So when ducks have a turf dispute and they're on their pond and they're whack, 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 and they're really going at it with each other, and one drake is seeing off another drake, when they have finally agreed that, you know, Drake A is actually having this section of the pond and these lady ducks, and Drake B is going off, if you watch them, as they go away, both of them will shimmy and shake, and they shake off the excess stress hormones. So the duck is, for me, is that visual reminder, shake off those stress hormones, Helen, and get it out of the system. But the other part is to make sure that your brain feels safe. And that comes from breath work, meditation, havening, getting your oxytocin levels up, self-kindness, compassion, all of these things. And the reason we need to do all of this is because we only have a finite amount of energy in any one day. Our energy comes from what we are eating, what we're drinking. Water acts as like a hydroelectric pump. As water flows in and out of the cells of our body, it acts like a hydroelectric pump, and that's part of your energy system. So if you're yawning, have a glass of water. If you've got a headache, always have a glass of water. The brain uses a phenomenal amount of energy and has high requirements of water. So energy management is really, really key. And when you're very busy and you're very stressed and you're going through a challenging time, this is when you must fuel your body the right way, with the right food and the right water, and then make sure that each day you help your body to recharge that energy. And we wouldn't let the batteries on our phone go completely flat, and yet often we get ourselves to the point where we get really flat. And the thing about this year is, for a lot of people, they charge along, and their recharge and re-energize is having holidays, getting away from the day-to-day. And of course, people just haven't had holidays this year, and our ability to go anywhere and get away from day-to-day stresses is really, really limited. So now, more than ever, it's important to get regular nurturing into our daily practice. And so that leads on to the final exercise for this part of our for the N, and that is to think about what self-care can you add to your routine that's directly within your control. So, for example, my daughter's part of her self-care routine is to go to the gym. She loves going to the gym, but at the moment, gyms are shut. So she has to make a commitment to find a new way to do that. So last night we went for a shuffle. I call it a shuffle. It's a run, but for me it's a shuffle. But you know, I don't run as far as she does. My knees don't like it as much as they used to when they were younger. So this evening she's, after work, meeting a friend and going for a run, a socially distanced run with them. So that's directly within her control. She might choose to do an online video or workout, and so many of the personal training instructors are now doing freebies or live on Instagram or whatever. So there's always something we could do. Same with yoga and things like that. When we're going and buying our food from the supermarket and we want to reward ourselves and give ourselves some comfort food, the question then is flipping it, because actually, is that, you know, psychologically I might feel rewarded from having a cake, but actually is there a healthier, more nurturing way to do that? So yesterday I really wanted a cake, and so I made a whole grain apple cake instead, and used up a whole load of apples. So I still got the thing that I wanted, but I made a healthier version of it rather than a donut or a wagon wheel, which, if I'm honest, was my first thought, but then I reframed it and putting it into a more positive, nurturing way of doing it. And we all have things that we can do. It's doing it, and then it's about saying, I am committed to doing this. So that's the second part. Think about what you want to do and then commit to doing it. So just to recap then, we have done a whole lot of stuff today. We've looked at who we're choosing to be, what our thinking and feeling preference is, how stress can hijack the prefrontal cortex, and then that can keep us stuck and in a negative behavior pattern, and how we move ourselves from our low self to our high self. And I'll send you the handout so that you can do that exercise, and I really recommend doing it. But as I say, if you struggle with it, for whatever reason, do book a coaching session. Happy to do some coaching over Zoom if anybody needs it. But trust me, I've just worked with over 130 reflexologists, and they loved their low self, high self. And before that, I've used it with lots and lots of coaching clients, and it's very, very powerful. And then we've looked at nurturing, and I'm going to send you a link so that you can take the self-compassion test that's on Kristin Neff's website, and you can see just how kind you are to yourself, or not, as the case may be. And then you can look at the handout and go, okay, which of those self-compassion ways can I move myself forward? We know about emotional intelligence and recognizing what emotions we're feeling. And again, I recommend printing out the handout and then thinking about how you're feeling each day and how you move yourself from the blue zone to the yellow zone, or the blue zone to the green zone. And that comes down to recognizing how we perceive stress, where our triggers are, and then how does stress show up in our body? Does it show up as tight shoulders and a sore lower back? Does it show up as reacting to foods and substances? Or does it show up as irritable bowel? Remember, irritable bowel is not just about loose bowels for some people. Irritable bowel is about chronic constipation as well. So again, does it show up in my breathing with a tightness in my chest and more shallow breathing? And so therefore, what can I do to get my breath back, to get positive vibes back into my way? So that's our ABC approach: awareness, belief, and then committing. And then remembering that we have a finite amount of energy each day. So use it wisely, with the thoughts that we're thinking, the actions that we're taking, and how we're managing ourselves. And this final slide was a little checkup that I did in the first lockdown, that I put up on social media, and it got shared quite widely, and I sent it out to my reflexology clients through email. And it's very simple. Today, what can I do to support my mind and my body? What am I grateful for today? Who am I checking in with or being connected to? In this discombobulated world where we can't meet in the way that we wanted to, what expectations of normal am I going to let go of? Get outside in the fresh air. Human beings were designed to move, and they were designed to be in the fresh air. So get outside, get into nature, look up. If you look down as you walk, If your posture is very down, your energy goes down. Shoulders back, head up high, count the rooftops, count the treetops, get your eye line high, and your energy will come up. And so that is everything for today. If you've got questions, you can type them into the chat box, or you can email me if you're watching this on catch up. And if there's anything that wasn't very clear, please do feel free to email me. I will now be downloading this and then uploading it and be sending you out the link a little bit later today. So I will stop the record.